Hello, everybody. Today we're going to talk about compliance in our series of things a CIO must know. My name's Scott Schaffer. I'm the CISO for Blade Technologies. I have the CISA, the CISSP, and the CISM certifications. And as we've discussed previously, a CIO, Chief Information Officer, is the corporate executive in charge of all information within a firm. And depending on the size of the organization, you may fill the roles of a CIO, the CISO, and the IT manager all in one. And when I use the term CIO during this presentation, I mean any of those roles, the CIOs, CISOs, and IT managers. Now, when we take a look at the various three-legged stool of IT security here, you'll see at the bottom, the blue one is compliance. So we're going to be discussing the compliance today, but just remember that compliance alone does not equal IT security. You also have to take care of covering your risks, as well as having a good governance plan in place. As I mentioned, cybersecurity risk is not equal to compliance, which is not equal to governance. Okay, so compliance, what we're going to talk about today, is making sure that organizational activities are operated in such a way that meets the laws and regulations impacting those systems. So this is when we're going to be referring to federal laws, state laws, these sort of things, and how that affects how we do our IT operations. Now, compliance, as you can guess, is an important part of any cybersecurity program, and it's becoming even more so. Heavily regulated industries are often a bigger target for cyber criminals because they have more highly valuable data. Makes sense. So this is why the government has stepped in to set some standards for various industries. And one, for example, we'll talk about is HIPAA in the medical industry, to be able to, make sure that their confidential information is not compromised. And the purpose of cybersecurity laws and regulations are to ensure that organizations take the right steps in protecting this confidential data. And regardless of what industry you're in, you'll have different sort of state privacy laws, GDPR, which we'll talk about, and other regulations that apply to all sectors, not just selected types of regulations like HIPAA, which applies to primarily confidential or personal medical information. We'll be talking about that here in a little bit. Now, while meeting compliance requirements doesn't guarantee that you're secure, it does give you a solid foundation from where you can build security practices off of this. Also, being non-compliant with a certain regulation could cost you a lot of money. It depends on what we're looking at here. I know HIPAA can fine you up to $50,000 per incident, for example. And that seems to be a number that's used a lot. Now, as you look at the different privacy laws as based around the state, you can see different states have different sorts of laws in place. You look at Missouri, it's gray. That means there is no comprehensive privacy law in the state of Missouri. However, you look to our next door neighbors in Illinois, it's currently in committee, legislative committee, to come out, and they'll have their own. You'll see that California, Nevada, Maine, these have already been passed and signed, and they're in effect now. California was the first one. And the New York Shield Law, which we'll talk about here in a bit, that is on the cusp of being approved as well. So you can see this affects you in different ways depending on where you're at. Plus, on top of that, if your organization does work, for example, in Nevada, Nebraska, and Florida, you have to comply with all those different states' laws. So the rule of thumb is if you have several states that you do business in that you have to comply to privacy laws, always try to implement the more stringent one to make sure you're covered in all states that you're working in. One other type of compliancy that we look at is the PCI DSS, and that's the payment card industry data security standards. And these aren't government regulations or laws. This is a set of rules that the payment card issuers, MasterCard, Visa, so on and so forth, have gotten together to set these rules to make sure that the information is held safe. So if you accept credit cards, you're most likely required to be PCI DSS certified. The types of things that you need to do to have this compliancy is you need to build and maintain a secure network, for example, using a password and strong password practices. You have to protect your stored cardholder data. You have to make sure it's encrypted and sure it's encrypted in transit when it's going across public networks. You have to maintain a vulnerability management program to make sure you're looking at these sort of things on a regular basis, so on and so forth. So PCI DSS is one. It's not a regulation or a law. It is something from the industry. So it's the industry standards that allow you, anyone that does any sort of credit card processing, you probably have to comply to this one. The next one here is something, probably the most familiar one we're going to talk about today, is HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. The primary piece of HIPAA that we're most concerned with is the privacy rule. And that's what we're really looking about there. Now, the question is, who has to comply to the HIPAA regulations? Well, what it covers is covered healthcare providers, hospitals, clinics, regional health services, individual physicians or other medical practitioners that carry out any transaction in electronic form, right? So any sort of data traveling electronically, any sort of scanning of data into their systems, credit card data, that would also be PCI DSS and a HIPAA thing, these sorts of things. Now, other people that have to comply are health plans, insurers, HMOs, Medicaid, Medicare, prescription drug card sponsors, flexible spending account providers, these sort of people. Anyone basically that has any sort of health data, that is what we're talking about here. Now, also, their business associates also have to be compliant with the HIPAA regulations as well. Now, who are business associates? If you want to see a complete list, you can go look at the law itself. It's 45 CFR 160.103 defines what a business associate is. But in short, it's anyone that may have access to the PHI, the personal health information. That would be, for example, IT consultants. We have access to everything on the network generally. So we would have to make sure that we comply with all the HIPAA regulations and also have a business associates agreement with the customer. One thing to note also is if you hear the term I'm HIPAA certified or something like that, there is no such thing. The HHS, Health and Human Services Department, and the enforcement arm, which is OCR, Office of Civil Rights, they do not have any HIPAA certifications, nor do they recognize any third-party ones. So don't spend a whole lot of money on a HIPAA certified training program or something like that, because those don't exist. And really all the rules are there in the statute. There's plenty of things out there that you can take a look at. Another one we see more and more is the NIST Special Publication 800-171 and the CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. These are both from the federal government, and they both pertain to those defense contractors that work with the Department of Defense. And the idea of it is they have to protect the confidentiality of controlled unclassified information, which is also defined within the statute itself. So this is something if you take contract with the Department of Defense, for example, and make widgets for the Navy, let's say, you have to comply with NIST SP 800-171 and the new one that's just coming out. It's a unified standard, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, CMMC. This has really only been required since September of 2020. So as I record this today, it's only been for about a month. What this can do if you're not certified at a certain level, and there's 5 different levels. Level 1, for example, is basic cyber hygiene, which is pretty much as it sounds. You have a firewall, you use anti-malware software, so on and so forth, to a level 5 maturity model, where everything is standardized and optimized processes in place across the entire organization. This is when you would be doing attack and penetration exercises, all the more high-end things that we see in large companies that are maybe not defense contractors, but do this as a matter of course. So right now, most people are shooting to get it level 2 or 3 to start off with. And then, as with all compliance-related items, as long as you're showing progress from reporting period to reporting period, you're probably going to be okay unless you're doing something completely egregious. But that's the idea. You start at level 1 with the CMMC, I should say. and you kind of develop it from there. There's a lot of different types of information out there. There's actually going to be a certification for this one right now. Currently, there is no people certified. The government's just getting that up to speed. There's a third party that will be issuing training and certifications later on this year or early in 2021. But that's when we're going to see more and more going forward. Another one, and this has been around for a little while, it's the General Data Protection Rule, GDPR. This is the European Union. Anybody who's in the European Union has to comply to this, and not only if you're there, but if you do business there from the United States. You're located in the United States, you're selling widgets to Germany, you have to comply with the GDPR. Also, and this is where some people don't understand, but really what they're looking at is the personal data of EU citizens. So let's say you're doing business with somebody in California, and they happen to be a French citizen. So you have to apply the security rule, the GDPR, to that person, even though they're residing in the United States, because they're a citizen of the EU. So most of these, some of the requirements is not as strict as some of the other certifications or other compliance areas that we've talked about. They include such things as appointing a data protection officer. You have to use what they call a privacy by design approach. So you bake privacy into everything that you're going to do. You need to implement data security measures, and you need to notify the regulators of data breaches within 72 hours. Another interesting part of the GDPR is the right to be forgotten. Any citizen of the EU can ask that all the data about them be forgotten. For example, let's say you are in the EU and you're in the Netherlands, and there's information that Google has collected over the years for you that's available through their search engine. You can petition them to remove that based on this regulation. So anybody who has 250 employees, this applies to. So if you're a smaller business, you don't have to worry about this as much, although I would definitely take some time and be acquainted with it. You may also note there's a lot of websites, especially at the beginning of the year, had a lot of pop-ups when you went in saying, hey, we don't collect any data. So that basically what they're saying is that we don't need to comply with the GDPR because we're not collecting your personal data. So that might be something, depending on what you do in your business, you may have to put some sort of disclaimer on your website to explain that to people. Other things we're starting to see more and more are the states, as we saw the map earlier, with the different states with different sorts of acts and regulations they're working on. Well, the first one out there was the California Consumer Privacy Act. It's very similar to the GDPR. It gives you the right to, if you're a citizen of California, to be able to petition to have your data forgotten forever. It's all about personal data privacy. The New York SHIELD Act is getting ready to be rolled out as well. It's based on the GDPR as well, somewhat different than the California Consumer Privacy Act at this point. But in the near future, we're probably going to get into a situation where we're going to have multiple different privacy laws in different states that we're going to have to comply to. And what I think we're probably going to see is the federal government's going to step in at some point and consolidate this and make a privacy standard for the entire United States, like the EU's GDPR, which is what the EU evolved into. Different countries had their own privacy standards. They worked together in the European Union to be able to pull all those together and have a standard list of rules for everybody. So here in the United States, hopefully we'll get there. It's going to be difficult for IT pros like us to be able to make sure that we comply with things like different California's laws and Nevada's laws and Massachusetts law and so on and so forth. So when we have one overarching privacy law for the United States, I think it'll make things a lot more organized and easier for us to track and to implement. Now, a few resources I'm going to flash up here. If you want to look at them later, you can pause the video and get the URLs and everything. But here's some information about PCI DSS from a company called Arctic Wolf, who we use. And this talks a little bit about how to become PCI DSS compliance. And then also the organization that PCISecuritystandards.org They give you all the best practices. HIPAA, the HIPAA privacy rule, can be found on the HHS website. There's a big section up there. You can look at it. And remember, the HHS is the administrator of the program, but the Office of Civil Rights is the enforcer of the program. So something to remember. There's also another link here to Arctic Wolf's How to Simplify HIPAA Compliance. Special Publication 800-171 and CMMC. You're going to find, I've given you the URL directly to NIST that you can grab that special publication. And when you first look at it, you're probably going to be pretty blown away because it's pretty big. Because, we're talking about, this is the type of regulation that companies like Boeing or Lockheed Martin and so on would have to comply to. Also a second one with 800-171 compliance. You'll see that we have a URL for GDPR, on how that works and how it's went so far. It's been a couple of years now. Things on how to become and stay compliant. That's there as well. And then finally, some information about the California Consumer Privacy Act from the American Bar Association and from how this changes cybersecurity from Arctic Wolf. And then it's a little information about the New York Shield Act, which is enacted but not 100% implemented as of yet. So that's a brief précis on compliancy and how it relates to you as an IT pro.